Europeans will be voting in parliamentary elections in June, and populist right-wing parties are projected to make historic gains. So what has prompted this shift among voters, and what could it mean for the future of the European Union? Find out on this special edition about the European Parliament elections. Germany's AfD party has been polling high nationally, and they're expected to increase their number of seats in the European Parliament. This is despite a string of fresh scandals and a German court classifying them as potentially extreme. Donata Porstmann is alarmed. She's founded a citizens' initiative to counter the rise of the right, which they believe is eroding democracy. But in her village of Dülben in the state of Saxony, their calls for tolerance and equality seem to be falling on deaf ears.
Activists are taking to the streets for democracy and tolerance in the small Saxon town of Dülben. And in the thick of it all, Grannies against the right.
This is about all of us and the values we hold, about freedom, equality, freedom of thought.
In recent elections, about 30% of Dülben voters chose the AfD, a party whose Saxony branch has been designated as right-wing extremist by Germany's domestic intelligence agency. The AfD lashes out against other German parties, denies human-caused climate change, and campaigns against LGBTQ rights and refugees.
I can assure you that burqas, headscarf girls, publicly supported thugs, and other good-for-nothings will not secure our prosperity, economic growth, and the social state.
The Grannies against the right are watching this rightward surge with great concern. Ahead of the European elections, they want to talk to local AfD voters. They've got coffee and cake and information about the right-wing populists.
If we can give out our information, hand out materials to a few people so that later this evening some might think it over in private and possibly realize, oh, I didn't know that, that would be the greatest thing.
Porstmann founded the group in Dülben about 3 months ago, after journalists reported on a right-wing meeting near Berlin. There, AfD politicians, right-wing extremists, and some conservative politicians are said to have planned deporting millions of immigrants.
Die Tatsache, was dort besprochen worden ist, hat mich also.
The fact that such a discussion happened was shocking and deeply disturbing, and convinced me something had to be done.
Da muss was gemacht werden.
The group started out with 18 female activists. Now there are 41. They want to learn how to counter right-wing populist arguments at practice sessions like these. Almost all of them are confronted with racism and extremism on a daily basis, in workplaces, sports clubs, and elsewhere.
I was shocked.
But that's why we should speak up in those moments.
The most frustrating thing for the activists is when their neighbors see them as the problem and not right-wing populism.
When I drum up support for the Grannies against the right, for instance, or other campaigns we're organizing in Dülben, I'm often confronted with blank stares, silence. People turn away and act as if it's us who are the problem, as if we are the ones making trouble here.
But the Grannies aren't giving up. There's too much at stake. After the European elections, elections will be held in the state of Saxony, and according to polls, for the first time ever, the AfD could win.
I want my grandchildren to grow up in the same free, tolerant, democratic state that I did. And now I'm so worried it's all going down the drain again.
But today, no AfD voters show up to chat with them at their stand. Despite free coffee, tea, and cake, none of the locals seem interested and decide to stay put inside. There's simply no dialogue between the Grannies and Dülben's AfD voters.
An increasing number of voters are turning to right and left-wing parties because they no longer feel represented by the establishment, which is exactly what prompted Filippo Maimona from Italy to switch the political aisle. He used to be a staunch conservative, but now he feels best represented by the post-fascist Brothers of Italy, who are currently in power. In southern Italy's Maratea, Filippo has faith that the party will bring change, but those around him see things quite differently.
A 21-meter-tall Christ the Redeemer statue overlooks the Gulf of Policastro in southern Italy. Filippo Maimone owns a restaurant here. In 2019, he made the acquaintance of Giorgia Meloni, chairwoman of the post-fascist Fratelli d'Italia, at the time averaging only around 3% of the vote. Now, she's Italy's prime minister.
She made a positive impression on me at the time. I realized that after the Berlusconi era, she and her political project had a future.
Maimone used to vote for Silvio Berlusconi's party, the right-of-center Forza Italia, but now he's gone over to the Brothers of Italy, which many in the country label post-fascist. He doesn't believe it poses a danger to democracy and says the party officially moved away from its glorification of the former dictator Mussolini long ago. Maimone claims this alienated many early followers of the party.
Some in their loyal base are disappointed because the party's not pushing through their right-wing platform. But Meloni's a responsible politician, so she has to consider the finances and the national budget first. And for that, she needs the support of the European Union.
Maimone feels that many left-leaning workers voted for Giorgia Meloni because Italy's left-wing parties have lost sight of their concerns. Jobs are one of the most important issues. Maimone's chef is less inclined to warm up to the ideas of the right-wing nationalist prime minister.
All politicians promise you the earth and the moon, but in the end, you have to manage the problems of daily life yourself. I don't demand that politicians save our lives, but if you believe in something and have ideals, but never see anything get better, you lose hope. And in Italy, we haven't seen any real changes for the better.
Giorgia Meloni has been governing Italy since 2022. Internationally, she portrays a more moderate stance, showing support for NATO and Ukraine. Critics say it's a different matter when it comes to domestic affairs. She abolished the citizens' benefits, outlawed surrogate motherhood, and led campaigns against journalists and intellectuals. Maimone often argues over politics with his friend, Giuseppe.
You lefties only think about civil rights. You concentrate only on issues like those. You've forgotten the workers, the poorest of society. You've turned into the party of the rich and the privileged. And you with your slogans, let's close the ports, no to migrants, and abortion is not a right. You're constantly attacking these civil rights. It might work for now, because people are still honeymooning with Meloni, and the right-wing coalition has their support. But sooner or later, that honeymoon will be over.
Meloni's slogan for the European Parliament election is, "Italy changes Europe." It's a ray of hope for Filippo, but a nightmare for Giuseppe. And for both, it'll be a bone of contention for a long time to come.
While far-right parties are becoming more established at national levels in Europe, they have yet to make their mark on the European stage. But if they gain more seats in the upcoming elections, European Union policies could significantly change. So what exactly would a shift to the right mean for the EU? Our next report takes a look at the consequences this could have both in Europe and outside its borders.
In the June elections for the European Parliament, right-wing and far-right parties are expected to gain more seats. So far, the far-right has not yet managed to unite at the European level. It's divided into different factions. But what would a right-wing surge in the European Parliament mean? What consequences would it have for the EU and the world? If Europe's right-wing factions became a stronger and united group, they would most likely try to reduce migration into the EU by attempting to change EU laws. This in turn might mean an increased number of people trying to enter the EU irregularly, via land routes or across the dangerous Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic. The far right would also likely try to force the EU to abandon its goal of being climate neutral by 2050. Many right-wing and far-right parties say green laws are having a negative effect on domestic workers and farmers. European aid to developing countries could also be reduced drastically. But all these changes would require a united right and far-right political front, which experts believe the different groups are still unlikely to achieve. The main sticking point? Russia. One of Italy's right-wing parties, the Lega, as well as the Freedom Party of Austria, have both criticized the West's hard line against Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. But Poland's right-wing Law and Justice Party and Italy's other far-right party, the Brothers of Italy, are strong backers of Ukraine. And even if the far-right factions are able to unite, Europe's conservative and centrist parties have so far refused to make deals with them. However, if that changed, the far-right and right-wing parties would truly gain influence in the European Parliament.
The attempted assassination of Slovakia's populist leader Robert Fico has highlighted the nation's deep political divide. Authorities say the suspect had a clear political motivation. Prime Minister Fico came to power again last year, this time on a pro-Russian platform. His nationalist and populist rhetoric has raised concerns in the EU. Data expert Veronika Frankowska believes disinformation campaigns with deepfakes and artificial intelligence were rampant in Slovakia's elections, and she fears they could also sway the vote in European elections.
In Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia, Veronika Frankowska is on a mission to protect her home country from disinformation and fake news.
We come across a lot of information, especially on the internet, and it's hard for people to tell whether it is or isn't the truth. And our job is to look for the pieces of information that are false or misleading.
In June, Europeans will vote for a new parliament. Frankowska's small NGO is one of 29 fact-checking teams across the EU working with US tech giant Meta to debunk fake content. They are fighting a new enemy, deepfakes, clips created in minutes with the help of AI software in which people appear to say or do things they never did. And no country in Europe has experienced this new threat firsthand like Slovakia.
In September 2023, we had parliamentary elections, and in the months before them, there was quite a rise in disinformation.
Just a few days before the election, suspicious audio files appeared online. They seemingly involved Michal Šimečka, the leader of the pro-European Progressive Slovakia party. In one of them, he seemed to be talking to a journalist about how to rig the election. In another one, about plans for raising the price of beer.
Both of these deepfakes first appeared on Telegram, but they gained traction when they were reshared by accounts on Facebook.
From there, they spread like a wildfire.
They were shared on personal messages, in WhatsApp messages.
Within hours, fact-checkers debunked the posts as likely fakes, prompting Meta to label them. But people continued to share them, and Šimečka's progressives lost the election by a few points to the populist pro-Russian Smer SD party. Meta, the tech giant behind Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp, said it had slowed down the spread of the Slovak deepfakes after they'd been flagged. And yet, the deepfake about election rigging still amassed over 100,000 public views in a country of less than 5.5 million people. That's how disinformation works, experts say. Its very nature makes it impossible to say with 100% certainty who's behind it. And yet, One former senior government official told us that when it comes to last year's deepfakes, he's pretty sure.
I believe it's very likely that there was a Russian footprint because there are so many coincidences and so many details that just wouldn't allow any other logical explanation. My name is Daniel Milo, and until December last year I was the director of Center for Countering Hybrid Threats at Slovak Ministry of Interior. Shortly after the government was formed, that the mission that I believe in, mainly to protect Slovakia from foreign hostile influence and to be able to push back against such influence, was not possible anymore.
Since then, Milo says, the new pro-Russian government has got rid of many early warning and defense mechanisms.
It's much easier for Russia to conduct its influence operations. Well, I definitely expect Russia to intensify their activities.
In an email, Slovakia's Interior Ministry rejected Milo's statements, saying that they do not accord with real fact and undermine the work results of specialists. As Slovakia, along with the rest of the European Union, enters election mode, fears are running high that AI-generated deepfakes could, once again, emerge in the run-up to the vote.
I'm afraid that especially in Slovakia, but also in other countries, this is only going to show and become more distinct before the European elections.
The threat is real.
The tug-of-war between pro-European parties and the right is also changing the media landscape in Poland. Journalist Dorota Bawowek was directly affected by the policies of the nationalist Law and Justice Party. They ruled Poland from 2015 until last year. The new coalition is now trying to reverse the country's shift to the right, but their methods are drawing criticism even from the government's own supporters.
Dorota Bawowek is getting ready to return to Polish airwaves. From here in Strasbourg, she's become the new face of Poland's public broadcaster in the European Union, something unthinkable until last year.
I did everything I could to not let the politicians decide about my profession.
Dorota was fired from a private Polish channel in 2022, officially over COVID rule breaches. But she's sure it was down to the media influence of Poland's former nationalist Eurosceptic government.
I felt the pressure from 2015 onwards. It was growing. It was always bigger when it was close to the elections. Sometimes when the big things were happening in Brussels, which were negative for Poland, I was not asked to report on them.
After a pro-European Conservative-led coalition gained the numbers to govern last year, Dorota was recruited to report for Poland's public service broadcaster TVP. In Warsaw, there are more new kids on the block. There's been a radical switch-up at the channel once accused of being nothing more than a populist government mouthpiece.
What changed? Everything changed. Most of all, the people. Entire teams are new, plus the type of language we use has changed. This means there is no hatred or the venom that has flowed from the screens over the last 8 years. We changed it to simply pluralistic language, democratic language, the language of public television.
But the change is controversial. The station was occupied by nationalist protesters in December and temporarily went off air amid the chaos. Many staffers were suddenly sacked. Among them, Cezary Gmis, newly returned from Germany and out of a job.
I'm sad that I'm not in Berlin more.
For years, Cezary was a TVP correspondent, breaking big stories. He's been accused of favouring the previous government in his coverage, but after being sacked, he says he's the one who's the victim of a biased system.
This is the experience of every journalist in Poland with conservative views. I never work in any media outlet for more than a few years because left-leaning liberal circles put pressure on these media to deprive them of their voice.
As the media landscape shifts, even observers who back the new government's moves say it's stretched the limits of the law.
Maybe these activities of our government, firing people out, was not pretty legal, but it was necessary. This new television new public media need some time to gather credibility.
Unpicking the legacy of Poland's recent past is also proving difficult for the new government in other areas. The EU sanctioned the last administration over alleged attempts to control Polish courts through new laws. Now, judges want systemic change to restore independence.
The last 8 years have been very difficult because we have been fighting to ensure that Poles have the right to go to court, so that politicians do not dictate the content of judges' rulings. We want to build a modern European system and end a system that, over several decades, has greatly strengthened the role of the Minister of Justice in Poland.
And that will take time in a Poland which remains politically polarised. But outside Warsaw, there are fewer clashes to cover these days.
The general atmosphere around Poland in Brussels, in Europe, has changed to a much more positive one. When I report from Brussels, I don't have to explain so much why the EU decided to criticize us, why we are punished. But I have a new challenge, which is to present the real face of the European Union to the Polish people.
EU elections are fast approaching and populist parties are expected to gain ground. Dorota says she'll be here to cover every twist and turn.
Now to a place that's divided not by politics, but by a border. Leidingen is a town that straddles both Germany and France. While EU regulations apply here, one part is governed by French laws and the other by German ones. The red tape makes life complicated, but despite those challenges, the villagers don't want to take sides.
Now I'm in Germany. And now I'm in France.
Henning and his parents live in a binational village. France on the left, Germany on the right. Leidingen has been split since Napoleonic times. Alois Tusch loves strolling around the village.
We're on the neutral street. My left foot is in France, my right foot is in Germany. We're living the European dream.
But not everyone is a fan. There's a German hydrant and a French hydrant. A French church and a German one. French pets and German ones too. There's never been a border fence, and right-wing populist ideas have never caught on. Leidingen's simply too European for that. But Kerstin Moser says dealing with German and French bureaucracy can be exhausting.
It doesn't really have any advantages. There's a unique situation, for example, with thefts and burglaries. Criminals can just simply cross the border. Then we have to inform our French colleagues, which takes a while longer. And the criminals get away.
Then there are crimes you'd find in few other villages, says German village head Walter Schmidt.
So the German side still has a flag up, proudly signaling that this is Germany. On the other side, someone has removed the French flagpole. If a German had removed it, Macron would have traveled to Berlin to take this up with the German Chancellor.
Everyone here, however, is proud of the village community center, built with plenty of EU subsidies.
We couldn't have set this up without European support.
Schmidt's counterpart, French Mayor Madame Lemarchand, used to slip over the border as a teenager.
At the time, it was smuggling. Sometimes we'd walk through the little alley so that nobody would see us.
Alcohol?
No, not alcohol.
German wine isn't the best.
A little outside the village, Katrin Kleber and her husband run a cattle farm. They say dealing with two countries' bureaucracy is a pain. But before getting into the details, they first need to help a cow give birth. The Klebers breed cattle. Having the farm right by the French border complicates matters.
We farm land here, on French soil. We would like to use the land for grazing, but the law says the animals have to be quarantined for 3 months before they can be taken over to the other side of the road, to France.
She wants an even more open border, not just for the cows, but for her daughter, too.
I'm in Germany. And now I'm back in France.
Further European integration could be the key.